I can try to find another startup job, or I can place a bet on myself. And I was like, well, I think I'm probably more stable.
That's Asia Orangio, the founder and CEO of DemandMaven, answering my question of why start DemandMaven after being laid off from 2 VC-backed startups. And she's been right. She's been way more stable with DemandMaven, especially given that now DemandMaven makes over $500,000 in annual revenue. Now, what DemandMaven does is what they do is actually help companies with growth operations. And you might be thinking that's marketing and demand generation only, but it's not. That's only one piece of the puzzle, because if you're growing a company and you just have a really good top of the funnel or it's a really good sales pipeline, but your product really sucks, well, you're really not going to grow, because if you lose 80% of your customers, it doesn't really matter. So that's where Asia and her team come in. They help with growth operations on the marketing side, but also making sure that your product is ready for all of that marketing that's going to come in, and really looking at things holistically. Today, DemandMaven again makes over $500,000 in annual revenue and has worked with companies like Moz and Sparktoro and Techstars and MicroConf, a lot of really amazing companies. And I want to get into all of that story today in this video and go over of how Asia has grown DemandMaven into a $500,000 a year business. So let's get into it and start with Asia's start of her career working at a tech consultancy. So let's dive in. Okay, so it is 2012. In 2012, Asia is working for this tech consultancy, and she wasn't working on the tech necessarily. She was working on the marketing play, actually. So she was learning a lot of different plays in like email and paid ads and SEO. She was kind of seeing it all from what I can tell here in the tech consultancy. She was seeing a lot of different things, and she was here for about 4 years until 2016. Now in 2016, this is when she transitioned from this tech consultancy and working for 2 VC-backed startups. And she worked with both of them for about maybe a year or two. So she's working at these VC-backed startups, and they were, I guess, good experiences. She got to see what it was like, and she did build a lot of relationships in working with these startups. More on that a little bit later. So she's working at these things. She's working on the go-to-market teams and marketing teams and demand generation. So she's still using all this experience and using it here in these startups. And then in 2018, she is laid off for the second time from these VC-backed startups. She was laid off one time in about a year, and then again in 2018. And originally she's like, all right, I'm going to get a job and just do this again, look for another startup and do this again. But then as she was connecting with people and kind of going through the motions of, looking for a new opportunity, she's like, actually, maybe it's actually better that I build my own venture and DemandMaven. So that's what she did. She built DemandMaven. She took her severance check from her last job getting laid off and got an LLC, or got the company formation. And she's like, I got Stripe Atlas. Let's go. Let's see what I can do. And when talking to Asia, what she mentioned to me was that she would kind of do whatever companies needed. It could be marketing work, it could be demand generation, whatever it might be, whatever she kind of had in her portfolio of work, which at this point is a pretty good portfolio, right? It just like work. She had all this tech consultancy work that she did with all this marketing account work and then these VC-backed startups. So she's got a really strong background already in marketing works and just a portfolio that she can use as she goes. So 2018 is we're still here, but by late 2018, that's when DemandMaven starts to really get some legs, at least in the connection standpoint, because Asia joins with 2 kind of organizations, especially for advising. One would be Techstars in Atlanta, and the other one was Atlanta Tech Village. And so these are kind of the 2, I would say, like hubs maybe in Atlanta. And she just joined as a mentor at both of these programs. And what this did is really get her connected into the ecosystem. And she had both these connections from her experience working at both startups. So she became a mentor, and so that way she can connect with a lot of different companies really quickly. But even at the end of 2018, she really doesn't have like any revenue according to Asia. So in 2019, she starts actually getting revenue. She had a really good friend of hers get her one referral, and she gets her first job as, working, or not job, she's getting her first contract in working with marketing and demand generation. So she's doing this type of work, and she's doing this for a little bit. She starts putting a couple contracts together, things like that. And so by the end of 2019, she has $50K in revenue. So you're like, that's not much, especially given just like, hey, this is a lot of work. She had $0 of revenue here in 2018. Like, what is going on? It doesn't feel like she's actually replacing that income. And that's a really small check, especially over a 2-year period. And you're right. It took a little bit to get going, and that's pretty typical for building a service business, especially when you haven't gotten contracts out of the gate. It takes a little bit to get this going. So 2019, things are rolling. But then 2020, there was the pandemic and things are picking up. But 2020 was a really good year for revenue for Asia. As for DemandMaven, they did 250K in revenue, which is pretty sweet. 250K, that's a pretty big jump from here. And she was kind of, as Asia put it, is like, there's more cash in the market, things are really good ways, and that helped. And she's still focused on this marketing work here, right? But one of the things that she was noticing in working with clients is actually like, they actually don't need marketing help. So let me actually have Asia explain why these companies didn't actually need marketing help.
Over time, it just became really clear that like they actually had far bigger problems than marketing, but they thought that they had marketing problems, but actually it wasn't what they thought it was. It was in disguise. This actually is still true to this day. I get a lot of founders, a lot of my clients today think that they have a marketing problem. Marketing is actually really easily solvable. Okay, great. We're going to start tweeting. We're going to start putting social posts out. We're going to start emailing. Like, great. Like, tactically, marketing is actually very easily solvable, but it doesn't matter if I triple your lead flow, but you can't convert them, then it doesn't matter. So it just became really clear that like everything after marketing was a huge bottleneck. And then the same thing was true when it came to their customer churn. So I tripled your leads, half of them converted. That's great. You only retain about 20% of them in 6 months. That's trash. Like we're literally setting money on fire if that's the case. So like it doesn't make sense to pay me to do marketing if you're just gonna, churn 80% of them.
So as Asia mentioned, right, she's like, these companies actually don't need marketing. At least it's not the most significant problem that they have in their business. It might be their product sucks or that their team has issues. Whatever it might be, right? They have other problems than just marketing and demand generation. So this is where I think it's really clever by Asia. She did a really clever pivot from this marketing work into what she is growth operations. And I like this for a few different reasons, right? And Asia, talking with her, she talked about this with me, was that, right, there's a lot of agencies that, are doing, marketing demand work, and there are some monster agencies, and this is like a really competitive market here. This is like everyone's kind of going after another. It's a kind of there's only so many clients to go around necessarily, or at least that's the mentality some people will take. I don't necessarily agree, right? I think there's opportunity for everyone personally, but some people are really competitive, and this is a hard space to work in sometimes. But by transitioning and pivoting into growth operations, if you've heard of the strategy of blue ocean strategy, where you're kind of pivoting enough where it's kind of more of you're kind of one of one, that's where I think like Asia kind of took this. I don't know personally any other agencies or really anyone kind of doing these like head of growth, fractional heads of growth, or just thinking about growth operations. This is a pretty unique set of doing business as an agency specifically. So I really like this. And this also kind of put Asia right as one of one. And I think an easy way to market herself and DemandMaven, because if you're looking for growth, everyone's gonna be like, well, go talk to Asia, right? She knows her stuff. And she could have done the same thing with marketing, but there's a lot of different people. If you're just like growth though, I think it's a lot easier to it's a more memorable thing than just being like, hey, I'm good at marketing. So Asia pivots DemandMaven into growth operations. And I asked more about, okay, like why shift from marketing and demand generation into growth operations? Like, how did you actually find that right pivot, right? Because the market can tell you, but you also need to figure out like, why is that the right pivot to make? And she said it actually was a lot more like personal reflection and actually figuring out using a concept called Ikigai. Now, Ikigai, right? Ikigai is a Japanese concept, and it's a really cool concept that I like, especially for personal reflection and figuring out, okay, like what's my personal mission? What should I be working on in life? And so it's a really old concept, but there's kind of 4 bubbles here, right? So you can think of this as this giant Venn diagram. And right here in the middle is kind of where the sweet spot is. But this is what you love. This is what you're good at. And this is what you can be paid for. And then this is what the world needs, right? So this is a really nice concept of like, Here's what I can be like paid for. Here's what actually the market needs. Here's what I actually want to do, right? Because these things might be two different things, or even these two especially. And then good at, right? That could also be different. So it's really finding the sweet spot. And for Asia, right, growth operations was this sweet spot, which makes sense. She has a background with tech consulting, working at startups. So she's got the marketing demand generation, but she's also seen a lot of different things at this point, especially working with companies and seeing the faults and things like that. That actually, like, she can help in a lot of different ways. And as Asia mentioned, there's no such thing as just one little growth hack or things like that. There's no silver bullet. But let me actually have Asia explain why there's no silver bullet to growth.
There are no silver bullets. I know where this comes from because I in a way I was kind of a product of this, but it came from like the big growth hacker movement where all of these articles are published about acquisition and how, so-and-so 10x'd because of this one thing that they did. But actually it wasn't the one thing. It was like the 50 things that they did. But they don't know enough to know that they actually did 50 things, and they don't know enough to tell everyone else that they did 50 things. So to them, it's outcome bias, confirmation bias. Oh yeah, I posted on Twitter every single day, and that seemed to 10x me. And it's like, well, was it just that, or was it also like the messaging on the website was great? You had a really good like conversion funnel, like there are other things that are part of the story.
So Asia's right. There's no silver bullet to growth strategies, and there's a lot of different things that go into it. But what I want to do now for the rest of this video is actually go into maybe the main strategies that Asia was using to grow DemandMaven. And I would say there's 5 different ones. One would be networking for Asia, from her past jobs. 2 would be advising companies. 3 would be speaking opportunities. 4 would be Twitter. And 5 would be referrals. Now, there's a lot of there's overlap and things like that in all of this, but there's 3 of them I want to talk to specifically for the rest of this video. Would be advising, Twitter, and referrals. So let's talk about Twitter for a second, right? So Twitter is really interesting, and Twitter's changed a lot over the years. But for Asia, Twitter actually was like the main channel for a long time for Asia. And you can see this kind of as she's kind of see, if you go through Asia's old tweets and things like that, you can see she doesn't have a big following. She only had about 3,500, followers on Twitter. Even today, she's got 5,000 followers on Twitter. So it's not like she has this massive audience. But if you go through some of her tweets, she'll ask for help, like on like financial like help, or like how did you manage cash flow, things like that. So it's a lot of like building in public pieces and things like that. So I would say building in public a little bit, not a ton, but just like these general questions. And actually, I would kind of frame it as more just being part of the community of Twitter. So she would post these things, right, and get, traction and things like that. And that would get people to be talking about her, or even just like, getting conversations going. She's building trust just by tweeting things like, hey, how did you do that? Or she'd be replying to she replies to a ton of people. Now, today, this doesn't work as effectively because of the Twitter algorithm. Now it's X and all sorts of things. As Asia mentioned, and I think I've heard also a lot of other people say, engagement's a lot, it's much more down and things like that. It's not the same as it used to be when it was Twitter. So I don't know if this would still work today, but it's still an interesting test case and seeing like actually like, yes, you can get a lot of clients and actually build your main customer base just from Twitter. Okay, so that's Twitter. Let's talk about advising. Now, advising I think is really interesting because I don't always see this work super well, but it actually makes sense in terms of what Asia approached, how she approached it. And she didn't necessarily approach it from talking with her. She's like, I wasn't approaching this from a like get client standpoint. It was actually more of like customer interviews and networking and learning from other companies. So as I mentioned earlier, right, she joined 2 different organizations as a mentor. She joined Techstars and Atlanta Tech Village. Now, you can do this, right, in a lot of different cities, and even like smaller cities have lots of opportunities for mentoring, things like that. And at Techstars, right, this is a global network to be a part of. So what Asia would do, right, is she already knew the connections at both of these places from working at different startups. Her past startups had gone through Techstars and were part of Atlanta Tech Village. So she had these connections already from, her previous experiences. And so she went to these, the leaders of both of these hubs and were like, hey, can I just be a mentor? Can I advise companies, whatnot? Right. So she becomes a mentor at both places. And Techstars does what they call mentor magic or mentor madness. You'll hear them talk about, which is usually about 100 mentors come in and meet with all the teams for about a 3-week period. And I don't know with Atlanta Tech Village how they approach it, but you get to see, as a mentor, you get to see a lot of different companies come through the programs, things like that. And for Asia, right, in terms of her being, the growth operations expert, I'm guessing she's a pretty popular mentor, and that's been true as from even just her experiences, right? So she was working with a lot of different companies and building relationships, but also her network is growing like crazy, right? Because if you're gonna, as a mentor, right? So let's say this is Asia. So let's say she even meets with 3 companies, right? So she's got these 3, but then companies tend to, like, especially in Techstars, I would say, right? They're coming usually from all different cities, all different areas, and they talk to people, right? So they talk to so and so and this person, right? So you're kind of building these like sub networks a little bit just by like building these relationships. And she has, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. She's getting this, like, right, she's known for growth operations, not just marketing or things like that. It's like a really specific piece. She's known for growth operations. So she's building her network through this. And then the other thing which Asia talked about with me was that she was, obviously in Atlanta, but then she also worked with companies, in DC, in other Techstars programs, because again, this is a global network. And then all this mentoring and advising, she ended up, becoming a mentor at all sorts of places like TinySeed. And then she was also in growth, or mentor growth, or whatever this might have been, whatever it might have been. She was part of other organizations that were mentoring. And so she's kind of building this network that not only was based in Atlanta, she started in Atlanta. That's where most of her clients were to start, but she was growing her network just by mentoring and helping other companies go forward. So if you've seen Techstars and some of their mottos, one of their mottos is give first. And I would say Asia really followed that super well, and she got a lot out of it back, but that's not actually the case, right? That's not necessarily what she was going for. She was going for just to, hear from companies, learn what they were doing. And that really was a big case of why she pivoted also all these conversations from marketing and demand generation to growth operations. The third growth strategy that Asia used was referrals. And referrals, right, this is a pretty common growth strategy for service-based businesses, but this was a really interesting tidbit from Asia. There's a couple tidbits here. So one was that it was actually a really close friend that really helped get DemandMaven going. So it was one friend who led, kind of gave her a couple of referrals, maybe one key referral that led to first clients for Asia. But one of the things I want to point out in getting referrals and actually talking to a bunch of different people, right? She, as I just mentioned, right, she was talking to Techstars and things like that, is that she's known for one thing, right? She wasn't just known for like, hey, I'm a good operator, right? Because if you're a good operator, right, maybe it's like an operator being like, hey, I can join a good team. I'm good at what I do, right? What does that even mean, right? But because she was, maybe it was marketing, demand generation, but she pivoting to growth operations, it's super clear, like, here's what Asia is known for. And because of that, right, I think it's actually way easier to send referrals because you're known for growth operations, right? It's not just an operator, right? You don't want to be known just as an operator or just like, hey, I'm good at marketing, like these super broad things, right? Like, you're not going to get as many referrals otherwise, unless it's like, hey, I'm really good at growth operations. So that's where, if you're going to like niche down into an industry, it's really important that you kind of nailed maybe the messaging piece of things. Because let's say, for example, maybe it's not growth operation. Let's say you actually love like Airtable. Well, like Airtable, right, is super easy to understand and be like, all right, like, yeah, there's only like, this is a niche down to one tool that's really helpful. And right, you can build a full business consulting business based off Airtable consulting. But like, it's super clear, like, hey, this person's not just a good operator or a good software person. They're really good at Airtable. And right, and the same thing with software, right? It could be like, hey, they're really good at software, but like, there's a lot in that heading, right? It could be front end, it could be back ends, right? It could be like, the UX UI, right? Like, there's so much to it, like in terms of software. So like, what does that actually mean? So if you're looking for really good referrals, I would say like be known for one thing. Now, the other thing that I would say in terms of being good at one thing is that Asia talked to literally everyone. I mean, she even talked to me, so she's literally talking to everyone. So because of that, right, when you're known for one thing, it's really easy, right? Especially as you're talking to people and you're an active community member. She's active community on Twitter and Atlanta Tech Village and Techstars and, all these different communities, especially, maybe in the indie hacker space, right? she's really active, and because of that, she's giving the give first mentality. I think a lot is a good way to put it. Is she's giving a lot, and as a result, she's kind of naturally getting things back. And the sales process, I'm guessing, is not too hard because of the amount of value she's giving people, and just being able to build her expertise, and just being a good person in the community went a long way. So those are the two main things: is be active in community, I would say, for referrals, but also be known for one thing. Now, if you found this video helpful, I would love it if you can give it a like. And if you're looking for more content like this, check out the newsletter in the description below.